I'm Russ Stevenson, your host, along with Alex Stevens. Alex, how are you?
I'm here. I'm wonderful.
Good. We're here to stimulate your mind and elevate your creativity, and we're going to have some fun also. And today's speaker will definitely do that.
Hey, have you ever wondered how the wisdom of Walt Disney created Disneyland and how it became the happiest place on earth? How about how you can use the wisdom of Walt to improve your own life? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. If you've ever wondered about this, and even if you haven't, you need to keep listening. Why's that, Russ?
Well, because today we have Jeff Barnes, professional keynote speaker, university professor, leadership success coach, and author of The Wisdom of Walt, Leadership Lessons from the Happiest Place on Earth, a book that has already received advanced praise from Disney and leadership authors alike.
Jeff Barnes will be with us for the full hour. He'll answer our questions as well as yours, so please do call in here on Russ on the Radio.
Perfectly timed to coincide with Disneyland's 60th anniversary. Jeff's book, The Wisdom of Walt, is a story of success that will inspire us all. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be with you today.
We're glad to have you.
Well, Jeff, I guess we should just start right at the beginning. I'd love to ask you where your passion for everything Disneyland came from.
That's a great question. I grew up in the panhandle of Florida and actually started going to Disney parks in 1974 by way of Disney World, which had just opened 2 or 3 years earlier. And I just was that kid who was absolutely enthralled, like so many others, the first time I ever stepped onto Main Street. And so growing up in middle school or high school, if there was ever a reason that we were going to, Disney World, be it, as the band or Boy Scouts, whatever the case may be, I was always the most excited, and I was always, counting down the days until we got back into the Magic Kingdom. But oddly enough, the very first time I had a chance to go to Disneyland in Southern California, I was 25, was in graduate school. All I did was compare it to Disney World, and it was underwhelming, and I was a little bit disappointed. That coupled with, really, really long lines, and it was a hot August day here in Southern California. It took us like 3 hours to get on our first attraction because, we were on vacation and we slept in too long and, lingered on our way into the park. And so if you had told me in August of 1988 that it was Disneyland that I would fall in love with to the point that I would go on to teach a college-level course about Disneyland, that I would go on to write a book about Disneyland, I would have told you that you were absolutely crazy. But when I returned a few years later, I realized that I had missed the story. I had missed the history. And what I mean by that is Walt had this dream, this vision of creating a place where parents and children could have fun together. And what a great idea. And yet, like any dream, he faced all sorts of obstacles and barriers to making that dream come true. And yet, he believed in it enough to keep pushing forward. And it's that story that really captivated me, the realization that Walt wasn't always successful. He wasn't so gifted that everything just happened because he spoke the word, and he literally created a different world and changed our world because of one single idea.
It seems to me like you were born to tell this story, that it's just a passion within you.
It really, really is. And I have spent the past 25 years studying Walt Disney, studying Disneyland and Disney World, but also the principles of leadership and success, motivation and inspiration, and the idea that you could marry the two so that not only can we go to Disneyland or Disney World and have our dreams come true, but that we could actually pay attention to what's on display, take some of that home so that our own dreams, our own crazy ideas might possibly come true as well.
Well, Jeff, how did Disneyland begin? How did it start?
Well, it's a great story. Walt, of course, is a Hollywood studio movie maker, was living in Southern California, and he, mid to late 1940s, he had two young daughters, Diane and Sharon. And he always carved out time on Saturday afternoon for what they referred to in the Disney household as Daughter's Day. And so he would routinely take them to the beach, take them to the mountains, take them to museums, take them to parks. And their favorite place was Griffith Park here in Los Angeles. And in particular, there was a merry-go-round that they loved to ride. Now, of course, these little girls, being kids, they didn't just ride it once. They would ride it again and again and again and again and again. Any parent or grandparent knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so, while they would ride, Walt would find himself sitting on this bench eating peanuts completely by himself. And so as the merry-go-round spin, Walt's own mind began to spin, and he came up with this dream, this idea of a place where parents and children could have fun together, and it would be clean, and it would be special, and it would tell stories. And so from that park bench, the idea or the dream of Disneyland was born, and he got serious about it in the early 1950s. And as the dream became bigger and bigger and bigger, two things happened. First of all, he came to realize his original thought of, we've got some extra land next to the studio in Burbank. We can just do sort of a little Mickey Mouse park there. Well, he quickly realized that his dream was bigger than that space was ever going to allow. And so, he paid for a study that eventually led him to a place at that point almost no one had heard of, which was Anaheim, about 33 miles south. But then secondly, as his dream became bigger, so did the obstacles, so did the naysayers. So, for example, his partner, his brother Roy, wanted nothing to do with it. He thought it would, lead the company into bankruptcy. And even Walt's own wife, Lillian, said to Walt, "Oh, honey, why do you want an amusement park? They're so dirty and they're so filthy." And Walt looked at her and said, "Honey, that's just it. Mine won't be dirty. Mine is going to be, spotless. It's going to be completely different." And I think there's a key lesson here. Those crazy ideas, those dreams, if they weren't difficult, if there weren't obstacles, somebody would have already done it.
Can I ask a quick question, Jeff?
Go for it.
Okay. We have Jennifer Valente from Phoenix, Arizona. Jennifer, are you there?
I am originally also from Naples, Florida, and have gone to the Walt Disney World there, and it's just amazing, with so many visitors there. And my question, actually, thank you for taking my call, Russ and Al.
You're welcome.
For Jeff is, how did Walt actually overcome so many obstacles to keep that dream really vivid ahead of him? I mean, he was a true visionary. There's who can top that? And yet there's a lot of creative people in the world, and they have huge dreams. But unfortunately, they throw those dreams down. So how did he keep his dream alive with so much that he was fighting through to see it come to a reality?
It's a great question, Jennifer. Walt was once asked, "Hey, what do you think the keys to success are?" And he would go on to quote what he would refer to as the 4 C's. And for Walt Disney, the 4 C's were curiosity, confidence, courage, and consistency. And then he went on to say, and out of the 4 of those, confidence is far and away the most important. And I think the way Walt was able to live his dreams throughout the course of his entire life, in spite of any and all obstacles, really boils down to confidence. He believed in his ideas. He believed in his dreams. And he ultimately built a team that he was confident enough in, who he knew could help him make those dreams come true. And those team members, typically early on, they would try to tell Walt no. It can't be done this way, or that will never work. But Walt, in his own confidence, would eventually manage to, encourage them by way of his grand vision to where they could come up with the yes or come up with the solution that he had been prodding them toward all along. It's really interesting. I think sometimes people think, if I had more success, then I would have more confidence. But it actually works the other way around. In order to have success, you have to start with confidence. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in your idea. You've got to believe in your dream. And Walt knew that the world was ready for a different form of outside entertainment. And he gave birth to it in Disneyland, and then he took it a step further with Disney World.
Yes. Well, do you think that he was divinely inspired? I mean, his core beliefs seem to be very wholesome, very family-oriented, and just really a pure heart this man had for family. I mean, he just was out there, especially that generation. But above all, he just was a man of morals, a high standard, a person of integrity, good quality. And that kind of, obviously overflowed from his heart to his head to the reality that it became. But do you think that he was divinely inspired by some of this as well, with the confidence that he kept, going forth with whatever battles he had to endure to overcome the negativity? How do you feel about that?
Thank you, Jennifer.
Well, I think, first of all, Walt was very unique. And yet, at the same time, he's not unique for being unique, because each and every one of us are unique. And I also happen to believe that each and every one of us are, in fact, divinely inspired. Part of the reason why I wrote The Wisdom of Walt is this idea that hopefully the book can serve as a bridge between Walt's crazy idea and dream that started on a park bench in Griffith Park, and whatever each of our own crazy idea or crazy dream might be. I think we're all unique in some form or fashion, and I think we all have some sort of divine giftedness, some divine crazy idea or dream that we're supposed to be pursuing, that we're supposed to be going after. The challenge is maybe we just don't know how, and hopefully some of the stories that we hear from Walt's life or some of the examples that we see on display at Disneyland or Disney World can show us some of the how that we've always needed.
Great call, Jennifer. Thank you. We have another call. Mike calling from Mesa. Mike, how are you?
Great. How are you doing today?
We're doing fine. You have a question for Jeff?
I do. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I read in Walt's history before that he and his brother sort of struggled with a relationship with their father in terms of maybe not being the most positive relationship. And I was curious if that experience or that relationship that Walt had between he and his father, that had the inspiration behind it to move on with his dream to form an amusement park.
Great question, Mike. I actually write a little bit about this in the book. Even though Walt spent his entire life chasing his dreams, and a blessing not just to the entire world, but specifically to children, a lot of people are surprised to find out Walt did not have a happy childhood per se, and a lot of that stemmed as a result of his relationship with his father. His father was very strict. His father was very stern. Oddly enough, his father was also very humorless. And yet, Walt loved his father, and in fact would go on to honor his father, because when you go into a Disney park and you walk down Main Street, pay attention to the windows, because the windows serve as opening and closing credits, just like you would have to a movie in the theater. The very first window at Disneyland over the Main Street Emporium honors Walt's father, Elias Disney, and it notes him as a contractor. Well, back in 1893, Walt's father worked at the Chicago World's Fair as $1-a-day contractor. And I happen to believe that it's those stories from him working in that amusement park setting, the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, it's those stories from Walt's childhood that provided really the only form of escape for Walt from what was otherwise a very strict, stern, and humorless sort of personality. And as we all know, amusement parks ultimately represent a very fine form of escape. And so it's those stories that I think gave Walt the opportunity to escape from a personality that otherwise he didn't really know what to do with. And that's what originally planted the seed for him ultimately building an amusement park, but doing it in a completely new and reimagined way in his middle ages in the early 50s.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was a great question. And Jeff, if you can go back to our original question, how do they keep Disneyland so clean?
Well, first of all, it starts with a commitment. And, Walt understood brand differentiation. And so, when his wife Lillian said, "Oh, Walt, they're so dirty and they're so filthy and they're so seedy," he had a commitment to exactly, and in mine is going to be the complete opposite. They sink a ton of money into keeping it clean and into the maintenance of the park, because they know that that's what separates them. And, Disneyland's been open for over 60 years now, and to a person, if you ask them what it is that they remember about going to Disneyland, especially in the early years, it's how clean it was. My own mother, who quite frankly could have kept the White House, she would tell us as children stories of coming to Disneyland when she was young in about 1960 and 1961. And what she remembered most was how clean it was. I had the opportunity just a few months ago to present at Grandparents' Day here at California Baptist University in Riverside, California. And we had a number of people in that audience who were actually there on opening day, July 17th, 1955. Wow. To a person, they said, one, we had never seen anything like it in our lives. And then secondly, we had never seen anything so clean. At Walt Disney World alone, they spend $100 million a year on maintenance.
Fabulous.
Disneyland began as one man's dream on a park bench on a Saturday afternoon. The man who knows the whole story, Jeff Barnes, will tell us how. Jeff, are you there?
I am.
Jeff, I wanted to talk to you about your book because, that's part of why we're here. It's called The Wisdom of Walt, Leadership Lessons from the Happiest Place on Earth. So tell us, what are some of those lessons and how can people use them to make their own lives better?
And then tell us how they can get that book.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I teach a college-level course on the history of Disneyland. It's a very popular class, as you might imagine, and yes, we do take a field trip to Disneyland as well as to Garner Holt Productions in San Bernardino, which today is the world's largest maker of audio animatronics. But unfortunately, not everyone can register for the class. I get asked about that all the time, and space is limited. From there, we decided to, write a book so that we could get the information out to as many people as possible. And what we do in the book is every chapter starts with a quote from Walt Disney. But I really wanted Disneyland. I really want the park to be the star of the book. And so each chapter begins with a story from Disneyland, and each chapter ends with a story from Disneyland. Just like when you go to Disneyland or the Magic Kingdom, you start your day on Main Street, but then you exit out of the park by way of Main Street as well. We also explore different stories from Walt's life. So it's part Disneyland history. It's also part Walt biography. But I think most importantly and most significantly, we then take whatever that lesson is and we apply it to the reader's life. Because again, I think we all have bigger dreams and bigger goals than just going to Disneyland. Our listeners right now, I guarantee you know what that crazy dream is. You know what that crazy idea is that you've been avoiding, not just for months, but maybe years and years and years.
Right.
And
so what are some of the habits that you can share with our folks today that they can use to create their dreams? Some Walt Disney habits or lessons or thoughts that can help them today?
Sure. One of my favorite chapters in the book is entitled Building a Berm. And so when Walt built Disneyland, he built it for the purpose of storytelling because that's what he was accustomed to doing as a movie maker. In Hollywood, he's going to use a soundstage to film these movies. But if you're going to do it outside in an amusement park, a soundstage simply isn't possible. And yet he's accustomed to control. So what's the solution? Well, when they dug out the rivers of America where the Mark Twain riverboat sails, they had about 350 tons of cubic dirt. And so what they did with that was they built a berm around the perimeter of the park. It's actually primarily where the Disneyland Railroad rides. but it's not only there to elevate the railroad, it has a much more important and significant purpose. That berm around the perimeter of the park is what keeps all of the magic inside of Disneyland and all of the external world, all of those distractions outside. Walt would say, I don't want the public to see the world they live in while they are at Disneyland. I want them to feel that they are in another world. And I think anyone who has been to Disneyland will say, it's so special, it's so magical. I feel different there. And part of the reason for that is because of the berm. Well, what I show readers is whatever your goal, whatever your dream is, you're going to need to build a berm around it. And so whatever you need more of to accomplish that dream, make sure that's inside of your berm. And whatever is distracting you, whatever is keeping you away from your dream, away from your goal, that goes outside of your berm, and you need to make sure that you have less of it. Steve Jobs once said, focus is the power or the ability to say no. And so when it comes to our dreams or it comes to our goals, we need that berm so that our goals are insulated and our goals are protected, just like the Magic Kingdom.
Wonderful story.
That is great. Well, we're going to go back in time a bit. Jeff, I'm an old marketing guy, and I want to ask you if you've heard of this name. He used to be the Dean of Disney University in charge of idea and people development. He was the one who helped Walt with storyboards. His name is Mike Vance.
I don't think I've heard that name.
Mike Vance, the reason I know about him is we use storyboards. I guess you use storyboards in Disney, right?
Yes, everything is done with a storyboard.
Everything. And Mike Vance, what used to be, now this goes back a lot of years, the Dean of Disney University in charge of idea and people development. I just wanted to throw that out only because I know Mike from years and years and years ago.
And actually, I was just doing some quick referencing. I actually do have a Mike Vance quote in the book, so I apologize. I didn't remember the name right off the top of the head, but Mike Vance was actually at Disney World the day that it opened in October of 1971. And there's a great story about him because, of course, groundbreaking for Disney World took place in 1967, the year after Walt passed in 1966. And so here they are in 1971, and his last dream, his greatest dream, which, of course, is the Florida Project or Walt Disney World today, is finally becoming real. The way the story goes is Mike Vance is there, an employee who helped get it built but had never worked with Walt and never met Walt, replied to Mike, hey, isn't it too bad that Walt Disney didn't live to see this? And Vance's reply was, he did see it, and that's why it's here.
That's
and
great.
that idea of vision, that idea of being able to dream something into reality.
Because didn't Einstein said imagination is everything, and that was an inspiration for Walt as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's incredible. That's the only part I know about the whole story about storyboards and Walt Disney, but I'm glad now I have to go back and reference your book.
See, we're testing you, Jeff.
We're testing you. I come back with all these old things. I don't know.
Well, I'm always testing my students, so they'll love to hear that the tables are turned for one.
There you go.
Jeff, I'd like to talk about a couple of your chapters as well, and one of them, I just love the title, and maybe you can elaborate on it, Listening to Your Walter Ego, and we only have about a minute, so give us your best shot.
Well, Walt Disney was famous for saying that we should never lose sight that it was all started with a mouse. Well, when he developed Mickey Mouse as the world's most popular cartoon character, Mickey Mouse would go on to be Walt Disney's alter ego. In fact, after Walt passed, Lillian would go on to say, Walt was Mickey and Mickey was Walt. Well, if you ask psychologists, they'll tell you we all have that inner voice. We all have that alter, or what I like to refer to as Walter ego. And if we will listen to that voice will give us the confidence that we need to do what we need to do and go after our own dreams.
I want to clarify for people, because sometimes we have that little devil on our shoulder, too.
Absolutely.
But, it's kind of the feeling of, hey, wouldn't it be fun, too? Or wouldn't it be exciting, too? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. In fact, what I do is I challenge the reader to fully develop a fun second friend as their alter or their Walter ego, and then recognize at the same time that that Walter ego is going to have to do battle with the inner critic, or what I refer to as the villainous voice. And, you were talking about storyboarding. We love great stories. It's why we go to the movies. It's why we read books. I think it's why we keep going back to Disneyland. But if there's no conflict, then there is no great story. And even though we love great stories, when conflict comes up in our lives or as we're pursuing our dreams, typically what we want to do is we want to drop everything and run in the opposite direction. Well, we're going to have to show some courage. We're going to have to step up with our alter ego. We're going to have to stand firm, hold our sword, and know that we have some dragons to slay, some villainous voices to beat. And what I would say to our listeners is, the bigger the dragon, the bigger and better your story.
Hey, Jeff, you're also a speaker and a leadership success coach. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Why don't you give our audience your contact information so if they want to ask you a question or book you, they know where to go?
Sure. Well, first of all, the book is available at my website, which is thewisdomofwalt.com. And you can also find the book on Amazon. It's available both in hard copy and as a Kindle ebook. In fact, the ebook's on sale this week for only $5.99. Regardless of whether you order the hard copy through thewisdomofwalt.com or even Amazon, I personally sign every single hard copy. And I do that because I think that's what Walt would do, and I sort of want to honor the person that I'm writing about and the phenomenal park that he built that all of us still enjoy today. If you would like to contact me directly, you can do so, Jeff at thewisdomofwalt.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Jeff Barnes, and The Wisdom of Walt also has a Facebook page as well. And I'm on Twitter at Dr. Disneyland.
You've got it covered.
Dr. Disneyland?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
I think.
Thank you.
Can I just say something about that? I think
Sure.
maybe I shouldn't say it over the radio. You need to trademark that, or did you already?
I haven't trademarked it,
And I think
if for no other reason, I'm not sure how Disney themselves would feel about it.
Okay.
But I do, and it's actually a name. I didn't come up with that name. My students like to refer to me as "quote unquote" Dr. Disneyland.
I forgot about the Disney Corporation, right?
Yeah. So when it came time for a Twitter handle, it just seemed natural.
It sure did, and you deserve it. You certainly have put your entire life into this.
Really, for sure.
Yeah, I really have, as you'll read about in the book, which I think is one of the more interesting stories. The very first summer when I finally had the opportunity to teach the History of Disneyland course, the day after the first lecture, I was actually diagnosed with a brain tumor. The neurosurgeon at Cedars-Sinai looked at me and said, "It's life-threatening. It needs to come out. Today's Friday. I need you back here on Tuesday for surgery. Best case scenario, you'll be out 6 to 8 weeks," which meant the course would vanish and my dream would be gone. And so I stood my ground, and I looked the neurosurgeon in the eye, and I said, "Sorry, doc, but you're not touching me." And it was in that moment that I realized this was more than an idea, really more than a dream. This was a passion. This really meant something and really mattered to me. And,
Yes.
the good news is we were able to put the surgery off. I'm healthy now, and as a result, we've taught the course on multiple occasions and even have a book out now. And so, that story really, fortunately for me, turned out very well.
It did, and it kind of makes me wonder about one of the titles of your chapters called Using Forced Perspective. What does that mean?
Well, when you walk into Disneyland, everything is not exactly as you think it is by way of, how you're looking at it. Walt wanted to build the park on a scale. And, originally, the genesis for Disneyland is really found in the railroad. And because he wanted it to feel like a storybook, he insisted that the railroad be constructed on a 5/8 scale. Well, truthfully, he really wanted the entire park to be built to a very similar sort of scale. But the engineers had to come back and say, "Walt, you can't do that because real people are going to be going through these very real buildings and shops and restaurants, 100,000 a day. That's simply not going to work. This isn't a movie set that we're going to, take a picture of for 30 seconds. And so the solution they came up with was, we'll build the ground floor to 90% or full scale, but then the second floor is three-quarter scale, and then if there's a third floor, and we see this best on Main Street, it's at half scale. And so everything gets smaller as you go up, and so as a result, everything at Disneyland looks bigger than it actually is. You stand in front of the castle. Pay attention next time that you're there. The bricks at the bottom are full size, but as you go further and further up, everything again gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it creates that storybook feel. The architects actually refer to it as the architecture of reassurance. It's part of the reason why, again, we feel so good and so special every time we walk into Walt's Magic Kingdom. And what I like to share with students is life is not about what happens to you. Life is how we react or how we respond to what happens to us. In other words, take a look at how you're viewing things. Use some perspective or some forced perspective. Make your problems a little bit smaller and your dreams that much bigger.
That's wonderful. What are a few other lessons we can glean from the park in these last few moments of the show?
Well, the other thing that I would say is you're going to have fear. If you didn't have fear, you would already be pursuing your dream. You're going to have failure, and that's okay. It just means you're one step closer. And then lastly, learn lessons along the way. Walt certainly had his share of failures. He went bankrupt in Kansas City. He lost his very first successful animated character, Oswald the Rabbit. More of his films lost money than made money. The opening day of Disneyland, which we celebrate, is July 17th each and every year. The opening day was a disaster. They refer to it in the corporation as quote-unquote Black Sunday. But Walt never blamed anyone. He took 100% responsibility. He learned whatever lesson he needed to learn, and he kept moving forward. And so it's okay to be afraid. Move forward. It's okay to fail. Move forward. Learn your lessons along the way, and those lessons will tell you what you need to do better and what you need to be doing next.
Now, that's magnificent because we all need to know that the people we look up to, they had grand failures too. And, I like to call it learning. It's not a failure. You just learned something. And
Exactly.
I think that's what Walt did. And also in the book, you talk about the fine line between educating and entertaining others so they buy into supporting our dreams. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Walt never got any further in his education than ninth grade. He quit school so that he could go and be an ambulance driver in France at the very end of World War I. And by the end of his life, he was not only the world showman, but he was one of the most important educators on the planet. And in that I work in higher education, I have a lot of colleagues, quite frankly, who would scoff at the idea that Walt Disney was ever qualified to be an educator because, again, he never finished high school and he certainly never went to college. But Walt would go on to say that he was much more interested in entertaining people, hoping that they learned something rather than trying to teach people something and being completely boring along the way. And I believe that Disneyland is one of the world's best classrooms. And again, that's why I teach the history of Disneyland class. It's why I've written the book, and it's why I make sure our students go on a field trip to Disneyland each and every semester.
What a fabulous college class that is.
That is for sure. Well, we love Walt Disney, and we love you, Jeff. You're great. And I heard through a little birdie that your favorite place is to sit in the mornings on the front porch of Main Street, USA, near the Silhouette Shop. Is that true?
That is true. A couple of reasons for that. First of all, it's a very quiet, sort of tucked away place that a lot of people don't really know about because we're accustomed to going to Disneyland at this point, and so we're typically racing down Main Street as we head off to Space Mountain or Pirates of the Caribbean, whatever our favorite attraction happens to be these days, and we sort of miss it. It's one of those finer details that we may not notice. And I've been to Disneyland so often now. I mean, my wife and I just in the past 4 years have been over, 200 times. So we don't necessarily need to ride everything each and every time that we go. The real joy for me is finding those tucked away places And sitting on that bench on Main Street, I'm able to watch the joy and the excitement of people as they start their day, as they start their journey, as they start their Disneyland experience, especially on the faces of young children, because they see it through eyes that, we as adults, unfortunately, more often than not, lost years ago.
Well, Jeff, it's been an honor. You're great. Go out and buy his book. And, God, you got to come back. This is, I love it. This is
Right.
Russ on the radio. Thank you, Jeff. We were enlightened by Jeff Barnes. He showed us that Disneyland is more than a theme park. It's a model for success that can inspire us all.